Hello, dears, and welcome back to the very last module of the IELTS test. This is the speaking test. There are people who hate speaking, and there are people who absolutely love speaking. It can be a very traumatizing experience or a very exhilarating or uplifting one because people either love or hate speaking. However, either way, the IELTS speaking test is designed to test your ability to use spoken English effectively. You're given an interview time, and the interview takes place in a room where you sit down at a table for a face to face interview with the examiner. Unlike the other exams, CAE and CPE or FCE, where you are going to be with one or even two counter candidates, you're going to have the interlocutor and the assessor. So there might be up to one, two, three, four, five people in the room. Here, you're alone with the examiner. You don't need to bring anything with you to the test except for the identification documents required by the regulations. And what's good to know, the test is recorded so that it can be checked later if necessary. Let's say that you're not happy with the grade you have received, you can appeal the decision, and then your speaking performance, the recording is going to be reassessed and reevaluated. The speaking test lasts for approximately 11 to 14 minutes and has three parts. And each part gives you the chance to demonstrate your English speaking skills in different ways. Part one lasts for 4 to 5 minutes, and the examiner asks you questions about your ability, your daily life, and other everyday topics. Part two lasts for 3 to 4 minutes, and you speak at length about the topic that the examiner gives you. And part three lasts for 4 to 5 minutes again. Here you have a more in depth discussion with the examiner. And you're going to say, okay, 11 minimum, 14 maximum. Why 3 minutes? What is going to happen? Well, in some situations, there are people who are very well prepared. They're not nervous. As I said, for them, speaking is a very happy experience. So they might finish in 11 minutes. For other people who are less prepared or maybe they're nervous, it might take 14 minutes because the examiner is not there to chop your head off, is there to help you. So there might be extra questions to help you perform better. Let's have a look at each part. In part one, this is the beginning of the interview. The examiner asks for your name and checks your identity. He or she then begins part one by asking you a series of questions on different topics. And these questions are related to everyday subjects such as work, study, hobbies, likes, dislikes, the weather, and so on. So nothing too complicated. And you should give full answers. For example, explaining your reasons for liking or disliking things. And when you've said enough on a topic, the examiner will move on to the next question. Part two of the test, the examiner gives you a task card or a cue card. On the card, you see the topic that you're going to talk about in this part of the test. You have to talk on your own for between 1 to 2 minutes on this topic, and you have 1 minute to prepare before you begin. There are also some bullet points on the card, and these give you some ideas about what to include in your talk. You're also given some paper and a pencil so that you can make some notes in the preparation time. The topics for part two are again are familiar, everyday ones, and there should be plenty to say about the topic you're given. For example, it could be a holiday you enjoyed or something you want to buy. And the examiner gives you 1 minute's preparation time to think about what you want to say before you start talking. And it would be a very good idea to use the bullet points to help you prepare and structure your talk. And when the preparation time is up, the examiner asks you to start speaking and then lets you speak on your own for up to 2 minutes without interrupting you. When the time is up, the examiner stops you and they might ask a question to round off. and collects the task cards and paper and pencils from you. And that's it. In part three of the test, the examiner starts a discussion with you, which is related to the topic that you've spoken about in part two. Here, the examiner is going to ask for your opinion about things and encourages you to explain and justify your ideas. And this part of the test lasts for about 4 to 5 minutes. And at the end of the time, the examiner thanks you and tells you that the test has finished. And then you can stand up and leave the room, not asking for the grade, not asking when you're going to get the grade, or any other silly questions. Just greet the examiner and leave. You'll be notified. Let's talk about a little bit about the marking criteria, but as I said in the previous podcast, I'm going to talk at length about the speaking marking criteria in a different podcast. Um, so while you're doing the speaking test, the examiner is listening to you and assesses um, your English speaking level, and you're giving what's called the band score for speaking on a scale of 0 to 9. So the levels range from 0 for non-user of English to 9 for an expert user of English. And it's very important to remember that, as with the other modules of the IELTS test, the speaking test isn't a test that you can pass or fail. This is a measure of your ability to communicate effectively in spoken English. So, to assess your speaking ability, the examiner uses a set of criteria. What we have online are the public versions. Of course, they have a private version. Yeah. Um, the criteria are divided into four parts, which focus on different aspects of speaking, and each aspect is equally important. You are given a score of 0 to 9 for each of these four aspects, and your overall result for the speaking is calculated from these four scores. The first one is fluency and coherence. Here, the examiner assesses your ability to keep talking. For example, can you say more than just a word or phrase in answer to a question? The examiner will also assess your ability to express your ideas clearly and logically so that they flow naturally when you speak at length. I like to tell my students that, does your speech flow like a river, or is it intermittent? Or if you want to be coherent, do you go from, I don't know, from ground floor to the fourth floor by taking the steps, the elevator? You cannot jump, right? You need to take everything in a logical way. Um, they're going to look whether you can link your ideas when you move from one point to another, and if you can use a range of different connecting words and phrases. And also, the examiner is going to assess whether you can do all this without long pauses or repeating yourself. This is fluency, when you're fluent. The second one, lexical resource, aka vocabulary. The examiner is going to assess your ability to use a wide range of vocabulary accurately and appropriately. So, in other words, just like in writing, do you know enough words to say what you mean on a range of different topics? Do you know when to use more formal words or when to use idiomatic phrases? The examiner also assesses whether you can do all this without making too many mistakes in word forms of collocations. The boogeyman, grammatical range and accuracy, is pretty much similar to writing, where the examiner assesses your ability to use a range of grammatical structures flexibly and accurately. In other words, do you know which grammatical structure to use to get across the ideas you want to express? Do you also know when to use simple structures and when to use more complex ones? And again, the examiner will assess how well you can do this without making too many errors. And the last one is pronunciation, where you're being assessed to where your ability is being assessed, to speak English clearly enough to be understood. I mean, do you produce each of the sounds correctly? Do you put the stress in the right place in words and sentences? Can you use intonation to help communicate your ideas clearly? And the examiner also assesses how easy it is for other people to understand your pronunciation. As you can see, there's nothing mentioned here of the accent. You can have all sorts of accents as long as they don't impede communication, you're good to go. Okay, we're moving on to strategies because there's a lot to talk here. Before the test, just like with other three modules, it's extremely important for you to familiarize yourself with the format of the speaking test. When make sure you know exactly what you have to do in each part of the test. Um, you can watch the speaking test videos on YouTube, or if you have bought an authentic IELTS preparation book, you might have a link to a website or with videos to see what the examiners and the candidate do in each part. It would be a very good idea for you to prepare for the speaking test with a friend. Take it in turns to play the roles of examiner or candidate. You can use practice questions. You can find them online. You can also find them on my website to practice asking and answering questions. If you're not lucky enough to have a friend or a study buddy, you can try recording yourself and then listen to the recording and to focus on different aspects of your performance. For example, to check your verb tenses or the variety of vocabulary that you used or use of linking expressions, and ask yourself how you could improve your performance. However, it's quite difficult to give feedback on your own performance if your English is a little bit shaky. This is why I strongly recommend you ask the help of a professional teacher. Um, when you practice answering questions in part one, try to get into the habit of expanding your answers. In other words, when you answer a question, try to say more than just yes or no, and give a reason or an example as well. What I keep telling my students, I give them a quote from the movie Philadelphia: explain like I'm a 5-year-old kid. Don't let the examiner ask you why, just give extra information without giving them the opportunity to ask you why. When you're practicing for giving a talk in part two, use a stopwatch on your phone or on a computer to time yourself. And this helps you to get an idea of how much you need to say to keep going for about 2 minutes. It's also a good idea to practice reading the topic, brainstorming some ideas, and noting them down on a piece of paper, and then use a stopwatch to allow yourself 1 minute to do this. Make the most of every opportunity to practice your speaking. Let's say that you're asked to participate in discussions or debates in your English class. Use this as a chance to practice for part three of the speaking test because this is more difficult. You can listen to podcasts in English as often as you can. Use the internet to keep up with the latest news and current affairs. While you're reading or listening, think about your opinions on the issues because this can help you find something to say about a variety of different topics. You can also make a list of words and phrases that relate to the topic. Use a monolingual dictionary to see how the words are pronounced, and this will help you quite a lot. And try to review the list once a week. Um, you should also have some study time to practice talking about a variety of different topics. And there's a key thing that I want to tell you right now. Don't try to memorize talks for part two. Yeah, so the examiner doesn't want to hear a talk that you've memorized word for word. And the chances of you getting exactly the topic you memorize are very low. And no, don't be a robot, and you're going to be penalized. Remember to practice your pronunciation. You can find exercises with a recording to practice individual sounds, word stress, sentence stress, and the intonation patterns of connected speech. I also have some shorts about this, about chunking, word stress, sentence stress, and so on. During the test, so during the test, the examiner gives you all the instructions you need and guides you through the three parts. So don't worry if the examiner interrupts you at any point. There are a lot of students said, "Oh, the examiner interrupted me and was quite frustrated. It was quite disrespectful." No, this is what they're trained to do. It's nothing personal. The test has strict time limits for each part of the test. So yeah, the examiner might have to stop you. Um, there's a certain etiquette that you have to follow in the exam room. I mean, you should be friendly and polite. You sit facing the examiner, make eye contact regularly while talking part in the taking part in the conversation. So um, be aware of your volume and speak loudly enough so that the examiner can hear you. Um, try to make the interview interesting for the examiner. I mean, remember that they also enjoy hearing what candidates have to say. If you make a mistake, we all do. Try not to worry about it. Just keep going. It's only natural to make the occasional error. The examiner know this and is assessing you on your overall performance during the whole test. If you've noticed the mistake you've made, correct it on the spot. If not, just move on. Um, in parts 1 and 3, if the examiner asks you a tricky question, of course, you can use a filler expression such as, "That's a very good question. Well, I've never really thought about this before," or, "Well, let me off the top of my head." This will give you a little more time to think about your answer. Yeah. In part 2, when planning your talk, always use the bullet points to guide you. They are there to help you. And again, don't worry if the examiner stops you before you've finished covering all the bullet points, because it's not necessary to cover them all. Make sure everything is structured in a logical way. In the final part of the test, to help extend your answers, use the PREP method. PREP, make a point. R, give a reason. E, give an example. And P, restate your point. Yeah, so don't forget to use connecting words to link your ideas together. Or what I like to say, state the idea, explain it, support it with argument if it's too difficult. Um, if you can't think of the perfect word to use to express your meaning, again, don't worry about it. Use another word instead, and move smoothly on, or use more words to talk about what you want to say, even if it takes longer, because this shows your ability to paraphrase. Paraphrasing means to say something in a different way, which is a positive thing. Yeah. And again, at the end of the test, don't try to ask the examiner about how well you've done, because the examiners aren't allowed to talk about this with candidates. Just um, greet the examiner and leave. And you may reflect after the test on how you perform, but again, don't waste time and energy worrying about this. What's done, it's done. And this concludes our podcast about speaking. In the following one, I'll be talking about the marking criteria for both speaking and writing at length. I'm going to give you more details because there's quite a lot to talk. Until next time, thank you very much for listening, and see you when I see you. Bye bye.